Hello, this is your host, Todd Lewis of the Praise of Folly podcast. I am joined by a special guest today, Aarvoll, and a returning guest to the channel, old Musonius Rufus. Now, just as get this out of the way real quick, one of my supporters and subscribers named Death Culture thought that what you're doing, Aarvoll, was really interesting with regards to an intentional community that's not just a theory, but actually something being done in real life. And Musonius Rufus has been on before to talk about intentional communities. So I feel like he felt that that would be a really great idea. And I agreed. I thought it was. So why don't you first briefly, Aarvoll, introduce the audience to what your project is?
So I'm the president of the Return to the Land PMA private membership association, which exists to facilitate communities based on shared European heritage, both kind of biologically and culturally. So our goal is to have full-time residential communities across the country. Right now we have one full-time community in Northeast Arkansas on about 160 acres. And it came together really far, more than I could have done myself. I had ideas of doing intentional communities going years back. I've been on YouTube, I guess, 13, 14 years. And from the very beginning, I was advocating for intentional communities just in general, but also as a solution for people of European heritage that are uncomfortable with the fact that we are being displaced as majorities in our own homelands. And in many ways, we're losing touch with our ancestral traditions. So for the kind of people who value that, I thought intentional communities are a very natural solution. For years, I didn't get a lot of support for those ideas. And I went deep into theory myself, thinking about how communities could be structured. Once we actually came together, though, very quickly, we found that, no one idea of how it ought to be done is going to be the final picture. Communities are obviously collaborative endeavors. And when the people come together, first the relationships form, and then the discourse happens. And then the ideas, they find their way to their final form. So it's not something that I created myself. I co-founded it with others. And like our secretary, Peter Siri, he was probably even more influential than I was in coming up with the final legal structure that we went with. So we have our association, and then here our land is owned by an LLC. We will probably move that into a trust in the near future. And then land ownership is kind of indirect via the corporation. So we own shares in the corporation owns the land. And it kind of operates as a neat governance vehicle as well, because, we have explicit contracts about what kind of usage is appropriate for company property, namely the land. So the bylaws spell out which shares in the corporation are associated with use rights to which lots. Those shares are transferable. You can inherit them, you can sell them, buy them. So it's kind of an interesting solution. I guess I'll leave it at that. Yeah, we've been at this for almost 2 years. October will be 2 years.
All right.
That's great.
Yeah, Musonius, do you have any questions?
No, I mean that sounds perfect. You want private ownership, a private entity to own it, so that there's none of the commerce laws involving equality are required, and that sounds perfect to me. See, like the Supreme Court outlawed restrictive covenants like back in the 1950s, and but restrictive covenants were everyone owns their land individually with the state, but then they create a restriction for living in the neighborhood, and you avoid all that by having just a private entity own the community. And that's actually there are many libertarians that have advocated this, like turn the community into sort of a business structure. So that sounds perfect.
So here's a question. Before you got to the practical side of things, what kind of intentional community theories were you tossing around in your head?
Well, I had lived in co-ops that were more left-wing in my early 20s. I wasn't left-wing. It's just where I happened to live. And I saw the failures of consensus-based government or governance. And what inevitably happens is some busybody ends up just bullying everyone else into going their way, or they just monopolize all of the actual administrative work in an informal way. So I think power, hierarchy, authority needs to be explicit and formalized and contractual, so that everyone knows what's going on, so that everyone knows what they personally are responsible for and what standards they're going to be held to. So theoretically, before we found this framework, I had thought of kind of an education-based model with a school kind of as the organizing principle of the community. And I called it the Pure Academy structure, and I made videos about it. And I still believe it could work, but the framework that we've come to is a lot more pragmatic, simple, easy to implement. It demands less of residents. So my concept with Pure Academy was that people would kind of on a regular basis present their research or other work academically that they were doing. I'm a believer in lifelong education. And, part of that is inspired by being on YouTube among people such as yourself who are constantly educating the public. So I liked that aspect. I liked, sharing that kind of content, getting feedback from others, finding new information from my peers. It's part of why it's called Peer Academy. There's also a double entendre where a peer, like peers of the realm, you have to create a new nobility to create a new social order. So that was sort of the goal, was how do we elevate people of merit? And so this idea was that you would present your work on an ongoing basis. It would be evaluated by your peers based on their rank in this system. So it was a vote-weighted meritocracy. Other like corporate structures do it too. You can always weight, what is one vote worth? If someone has higher rank in a system, then you can weigh their vote higher than other votes. So that removes some of the problems with just outright democracy. I still think there's a lot of promise in it. I had built up how that could be used to establish positions of authority and how that could be used to manage day-to-day activities in the community, and how a delegation will work and what responsibilities people at different ranks would have and who they would answer to. And it was all extremely theoretical. Didn't answer at all, how legally could such a thing be structured? Probably what I had talked about could be structured in a similar way to what we're doing. You could just form a company and then have the bylaws and contract of that company say, this is our governance structure, this is how it's going to operate, and then implement the Pure Academy model. But not everyone is behind lifelong education. Not everyone likes presenting their content. So it's really, you would need a certain kind of group to try to implement something like that. But that was my private passion for about 10 years, in addition to other things like Platonism and classical music and quantum mechanics and stuff like that. That was my social theory, was education should be the center of everything. And we need a kind of meritocracy that is open and not just, a hereditary monarchy or something, but that's also very explicit, and that kind of cybernetically leads to a social organism that's a high velocity flow of information, so that it's adaptable, so that everyone, remains kind of up on latest trends, and also ends up being of one mind because everyone's kind of consuming the same content in order to participate in the community. Excuse me, one second. I'm just going to shut the door.
Yeah.
Literally 1 second.
So while we're waiting for him to get back, we'll bring up a super chat from Death Culture for $10 US. Thank you very much. Good to have you on, Aarvoll, and welcome back, Rufus. The colony idea that was discussed on Rebel Yell podcast years ago is very akin to what RTTL is doing. Rufus, would you agree? So I guess that's to you.
Yeah, I would. You want private ownership, like I said, to avoid. See, where the laws come in is when you're buying and selling, and you can't discriminate among your customers. So, but when it comes to simply owning together, that's a private relationship. Governed by contract. So, Aavroll, you say you got an LLC that owns it now. Would you mind? And this is up to your legal counsel, but would you mind talking about the ownership? You don't have to, by the way, if you want to keep trade secrets. But who owns it? Who's the owner?
The community
LLC.
members.
Hmm.
The community members own shares in the corporation.
Okay.
So
And
we all own
do they have different shares or equal shares?
different shares. So, some of the people bought more shares up front and they have more of a say in the votes. But most of the day-to-day decisions are managed by the board of managers. So, we can kind of efficiently transact business as needed. And then when big things come up where the membership needs to like approve a new budget or something like that, then those who have more ownership interest, their vote is weighed more highly.
Okay. Okay. And that's in the operator's agreement for the LLC.
Correct.
Okay. All right.
So,
And
go
gotcha.
ahead, Rufus.
No, no, no. Like you have you have control and ownership here. And, they have specified in their operators agreement what member rights, the shareholders, what rights they have. And then day-to-day control is the board of managers. So it all makes sense.
So then, the way you describe this, Aarvoll, kind of reminds me of I don't know how familiar you are with Mondragon, the sort of like worker-owned co-op in Spain, which a lot of
Oh,
anarchists
yeah.
used to point to.
Mhm.
Um, I sort of get vibes that it's not exactly like that because it's not exactly worker-owned, but it does seem to have similar features. Would you agree?
From the limited research that I've done, yes, and it was a successful model for them. We, incorporating kind of corporations that are actually doing business with the public, they've done it really successfully. I don't know how we're ever really going to manage that. It seems based on just the nature of the laws that exist that we will always be consigned to have very small companies, sole proprietorships, or like less than 6 employee type small businesses. If Musonius of any way, forming larger companies, then please, go ahead and share that.
Well, I don't know. Look at holding companies. I mean, you could have these do need to be individually owned, but yeah, you could confederate, theoretically with a holding company. And so you could have many communities, each are tending to their own business, have their own entities, but they cooperate in the holding company for various things. So I'd look into that if I were you. Could build up from the bottom up and not the top down whenever you can.
Sure.
So now this is, I think, the interesting part about your work here is right. You've moved from the theory to the praxis, and most people never get that far. So could you describe how you eventually were able to move from theorizing about an intentional community to actually getting one on the ground? How did you get people invested? How did you decide where you were going to start and things like that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I've tried several times. So I moved to different parts of the country trying to found communities. I've put out calls to found communities. It's not a nice fact, but I think a big reason why this got started was I had enough YouTube subscribers where I could reach enough people where a small percentage of them were even willing to listen. So I think you have to have the momentum. If someone with a really large following wants to do something like this, they probably can. If someone with a small following wants to do it, they probably can't. That's just the reality. Now, as far as what allowed it to succeed, I think we went about it ultimately in the right way. So people came down for a volunteer project, and we spent, I don't know, a few days, a week together working on this infrastructure on land that I had in southern Missouri. So I put out a call outlining a vision for a media house and a school model, not exactly the Peer Academy thing, but something simpler that would be, actually implementable. And they came down and wanted to help. We had met up online weekly for months. I'm not exactly sure when we started meeting, but we'd had weekly calls discussing what community might look like, whether people might want to buy in together. It wasn't decided at the outset. And when you start communicating with people, you should probably leave it open and acknowledge that, we don't really know how this is going to go. We don't know if we'll get along in person. Let's just start the conversation, talk about what each of us wants to see. Now, the Ozarks, I had done a lot of research. I moved out here for a short period of time, like 12 years ago, for the same reason, and tried to do it then. And I just didn't have the momentum to actually, land. Other people tend to come to the Ozarks for the reasons of homesteading because of, the lack of permitting requirements, zoning code, stuff like that. It's just easy to build here compared to other parts of the country. Also for prepping, it's a lot of water resources down here, decent precipitation. The soil quality is not great in the Ozarks, but the land prices are so low, and it's always possible to do raised bed gardens and stuff like that. So there's a variety of factors why people want to move to the Ozarks. Our secretary, Peter Siri, who developed the majority of our legal framework, he also had identified the Ozarks before finding my stuff online and before we started corresponding. So luckily, a couple of us had already decided this was the place. And then another co-founder, he already had land in southern Missouri. So both of us happened to be in southern Missouri, and the other major co-founder, there are others involved as well. It's just the three of us have been kind of the driving force behind, I guess, the majority of the actual day-to-day operations, not to discount the contributions of others, of course. But yeah, it was just sort of happenstance. And then they came out, the vibe was very good for that week. Everyone got along very well. We went and scouted real estate that week. We made time outside of doing that volunteer work to do it. And it just so happened that we found the perfect site that everyone unanimously agreed was clearly the best deal, financially, clearly the best location. It's where we all wanted to be. And so we just essentially got very lucky. So the ingredients for making this work from scratch would be have a big following, start communicating with a group over a period of time, meet up in real life for a prolonged period where you're doing something productive. So you see people's work ethic, not just how do they do recreationally. So have a work party. That's our model. And then at that point, start actually seriously considering taking the next step. Now, the other option is join Return to the Land, because we're trying to federate a bunch of communities in our model where we're pooling legal research and resources. And also you'll have access to our member database, which now is in the hundreds, and we're booked out the next month for interview slots. So it's there's a huge amount of momentum already. And personally, I think one national association has advantages over a fragmented kind of approach. Yes, you could say that it's more vulnerable, if they ever attack us, but I think we have to look at the limitations of available human capital, and not many, like a lot of people can't even start an LLC and pay the taxes for it. It's just too complicated for the average person. So there aren't a lot of people who are savvy enough to successfully do it. And if failed projects happen, then that sets a bad reputation, sets a bad precedent. And people say, no, I'm afraid to do this because look what happened here. So one big, well-organized network can quality control, we can pool legal resources, and we can also build a big legal defense fund so that if any of us ever get sued, all of us are supporting that community. So I'm a believer in one big national association, and right now we have RTTL. So that's what I obviously support.
Given our previous conversations, Musonius Rufus, this sounds a lot like what you've talked about.
Yeah, it does. It does. And I'm always interested in the details. I mean, you said that maybe you could do a trust if you had to. That's what matters. Those little details about ownership, control, and legal entities. But yeah, when you have a perfectly private community, you're going to have to be doing a lot of things that people think of as public services, like the road, that connects all the houses and such like that. Worry about electricity. There's a lot of things to worry about. But the advantage is that you're not dependent upon strangers. You can live the way you want to live with the people you want to live with. And I encourage everyone to do this. And this is not a threat to commerce. You can still go to town and buy and sell whatever in town. This is about it sounds to me like you're talking about where people are going to be living the rest of their lives and raising their children. Is that correct, sir?
Yeah, that's the goal. We understand people will move out of these communities. People move around for a variety of reasons, employment or the climate. We've had people come down here who thought they could hack it, and then it got to be summer in the Ozarks, and turns out they couldn't. But that's the ideal, is that this is the permanent home for a number of families, and it is currently.
Hmm. Are there any like cultural differences? Like, I don't know, the Methodists want to form one of their own, and then the German people want to form one of their own. Are there any like cultural differences like that?
Oh no, we don't allow Methodists. That's strictly forbidden. Calvinists in general, there's maybe. No, yeah, we do have an eye to do specific religious communities for specific denominations if there is a demand for that. Right now, like we have a very tolerant group, which is kind of amazing because the big thing that you see online, if you've been in these circles, is Christians fighting with pagans and Orthodox fighting with Catholics and Catholics fighting with Protestants, and it's just it's been a mess, really. But that's also the sensationalist online discourse environment where drama creates views, and then views, that who has the most views kind of determines the conversation. And so there have been very bad incentives, I think, and I think whites as a whole. In the US, at least, I don't know, the temperament in other countries, but I think we're a pretty, live and let live kind of people. And I think that we can manage to do communities like this without splintering into 1,000 different factions. However, if someone wants to do a Catholic community, I'm all for it. If someone wants to do a pagan community, I'm all for it.
Okay.
So, yeah. So given what are the sort of requirements for, like, if you're going to live in this community, what are the sort of the requirements that any individual would have to adhere to? Is it very strict or very looser, or what exactly would those be?
It's a relatively big tent. And we have kind of the public criteria that are outlined in our articles of association for the PMA. And then we have our own private list of factors that we look at. Ancestry is one. We're not absolute purists on that. If you're 1/16th Syrian or something, you might still get in. So go ahead and apply. Admissions decisions are made on a case-by-case basis. So yeah, there's obviously the ancestry component. There is traditional religion. So Christians and pagans and even agnostics, like traditional European religious persuasions, are acceptable. Islam, we don't consider that a traditional European religion, Bulgaria aside, I guess. Although
Albania,
still,
yeah.
Albania, you're right. So yeah, there's that. We believe in traditional family structures. So some people would argue that polygamy in some sense could be traditional. We've decided that that's not a traditional European value. So no polygamy. And then like heterosexual normativity. If someone is inclined that way but doesn't practice, that's an edge case. But if someone's a practicing homosexual, that runs afoul of our ethical guidelines as an association. So very likely that would disqualify someone. So yeah, those are the sorts of things that we keep as criteria. Very big tent. Most European people, really around the world, would agree with those as norms. Beyond that, like we believe in, striving to improve ourselves. Meliora, ever better. I think that's an important ethos. We especially welcome people who have a homesteading spirit and who want to build. This is a creative endeavor. So if you want to live in an apartment and play video games all day and collect welfare, that's, not exactly consistent with our ethos. Things like that.
So to what extent does your own Platonism play into this? Because, for example, in the Middle Ages, right, Platonism was able to colonize both Christian, Jewish, and Islamic thought. It has this ability to incorporate and tolerate a lot of different perspectives. To what extent does that, if at all, influence this live and let live view of philosophy and religion in your community?
I don't want to be presumptuous, but I would like to think that because I was one of the main figureheads acting as a social center, getting all of us together, and because before I preached Platonism, I preached perennialism. And so I've always believed there's one deep truth that different traditions all embody to differing degrees. They're not all equal, and it's not all, the same. It's not like Islam just is Christianity and there's no differences. There are meaningful differences. But like at a deep metaphysical level, there's one truth and different traditions embody it differently. And that was kind of the Platonist position. Even in Middle Platonism, Numenius integrated, Jewish and Christian by extension, and Near Eastern pagan and other pagan traditions. I mean, the Interpretatio Romana was just taken as a given. There's one set of metaphysical forces governing the world. Different people call them by different names. Iamblichus formalizes that and adds a lot of specificity over exactly how that works in his letter to Anibo on the mysteries of the Egyptians. So there's a big, deep, rich, Platonic, perennialist, and also just classical European way of interpreting religion that is very open and tolerant and wants to find commonalities. And obviously, a lot of the church fathers were deeply inspired by the Platonic tradition. Many of them were explicit Platonists, even after conversion in many cases. There was the bishop Synesius in the 5th century, who, in order to be appointed as bishop, said like, hey, I'm fine doing this, but I still believe in the eternal preexistence of souls and the eternity of the world. That was a condition. Those are Platonic doctrines, not Nicene Christian doctrines. So I guess because I've talked about Platonism and its influence in both the obviously pagan context in which it originated and the Christian context, and how there's kind of one metaphysical system that's outright explicit. If you read Proclus and Pseudo-Dionysius back to back, it's clear this is a single metaphysical system. Hardly even the names change, right? They use the same terms. So all of that, I think, was helpful in setting a certain kind of tone, but I'm far from the only person who feels this way online, and far from the only person in our membership who came into all this with those views. So I think it's been productive. But, naturally, I'm not against people who do believe that they have the one and only true tradition. If there's an Orthodox person who's a hardliner, a lot of Orthodox, though, are more like perennialist leaning nowadays. And how do you decide, like, what's the true Orthodox? That's one problem with Orthodoxy, is there isn't some authority to decide here is the true Orthodox tradition. Every Orthodox branch ends up being its own kind of authority. Not quite as bad as Protestantism, but leaning obviously more that way compared to Catholics. And then Catholics have their own laundry list of problems, in my opinion, as a lifelong practicing Catholic. But
you're really
yeah,
a
I think
Platonist.
it was helpful.
I mean, you are a Platonist. Is that correct, Aavroll?
I am a Platonist, yeah.
Wow.
So, is there anything you want to weigh in on or chime in on here, Musonius?
No, I mean that's. It sounds like. Do you really idealize the Roman Republic, the Roman Empire? You sound like a classicist, too.
I am a bit of a classicist. I also have a fondness for, the thing, Germanic folk customs and ways of governing, and poetry and everything like that. So, I'm not just a classicist. I'm an enthusiast for the European tradition overall. But yeah, most of my reading pertains to kind of the classical era, especially early antiquity and kind of high Athenian democracy.
Okay, Tacitian studies and all that. Yeah, well, the framers shared your passion. The American framers. We were set up much more on the Roman model. Greece, Greek democracy was sort of a bad word to the framing generation. It wasn't until the 1830s and the Jacksonian era that and Greece's own war for independence against the Ottomans that changed American culture to where it was pro-Greek, or less Roman, more pro-Greek. But that was that's amazing. You're a classicist. All right.
So given that we've already gone down this road, to what extent does like the the settler tradition inform what you're doing. You know, Americans just going out to the frontier, setting up their own systems of governance and livelihoods, well, you know, without waiting for permission from, you know, the federal government or some central authority.
Right. Yeah, I like that spirit. You know, I was told stories about my great grandfather, who was an explorer. He was a petroleum geologist surveying for oil, but he explored the Southwest, and you know, captured by a band of Pancho Villa's men, and then escaped. And you know, I like that lore of especially the West. You know, I'm from California, so my ancestors made it all the way out there, and that whole story, you know, the kind of taming of the far West is pretty extraordinary. So I'm inspired by it. I also think that the colonists were doing something pretty similar to what we're doing. They all went out and founded intentional communities. Some of them were more utopian. We're not exactly utopian. If I had my druthers and we went according to my initial, you know, peer academy model for governance, then we'd be utopian. And it probably wouldn't have worked, frankly, because that's not human nature. But yeah, but you know, that's the Platonist in me. You know, Plato recognized the Republic. It's not exactly consistent with human nature as it is, which is why you have to take a generation of children, kick out all the parents, raise the children to. That's one of the keys for actually implementing the Republic. But anyway, so that was a digression.
Oh, you know, the Roman Republic had the cursus honorum, the course of offices. You know, anyone growing up in this community can spend time rotating through different public service functions, you know, and work their way up to office, your board of managers or trustees or whatever you have in the future. And so, yeah. Well, this is all good stuff because we're talking about real democratic and republican structures, you know, how people actually own and rule and own things together. And that's where the rubber meets the road. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned earlier in this conversation that you have planned at some point of expanding this model out to other communities. To what extent, if any, is this governed by Dunbar's number? And do you have like a number where it's like, okay, our Ozarks community is too big, now we need to break out?
Well, it's not like a cell and splinter kind of model. We're looking for, actually, we have a group already lined up for land by two here in the Ozarks. So we're looking for land for that. We're looking in Appalachia. There are a couple groups looking at different areas in Appalachia. Some of the bigger groups there or subgroups would be, you know, Eastern Tennessee. I think it's very likely in the near future there will be an RTTL community in Eastern Tennessee. And then West Virginia, of course, is a kind of perennial target for this sort of thing. The Pacific Northwest, another perennial target. Of course, there are plenty of people interested up there. Probably, you know, the area in the vicinity of Coeur d'Alene, that's been the hot spot for quite a while now. There are established groups up there, none doing an intentional community per se, but they've, you know, established roots in the area, and that's going to be really helpful for transitioning into an intentional community. So they're literally RTTL members in the Pacific Northwest right now, scouting for land. So that's the kind of planning phase that's at. And yeah, I myself am planning a tour to go and organize not just residential communities, which are far more legally complex, but also recreational properties. You know, there's a larger body of case law supporting the right of private associations to run temporary camps, you know, temporary lodging, things like that. And then as far as like day use camps, that's, in my opinion, very easy. I think we can do that under our existing PMA structure or start another PMA specifically for that. I don't see why we couldn't use one network though. And the goal is that there'll be white community centers, white recreational spaces that our guys will have access to all across the country. And I think that's going to be a big factor in spurring on the growth of further intentional communities. And that's informed by our experience where once we met up in person, you know, the roadblock of trust or the lack thereof kind of dissolved, and we could move forward in good faith. So once people meet up and have recreational activities and work together on building community centers and things like that, then they'll be far more inclined to take on larger risks and do full-time communities.
Okay, we have another super chat from Death Culture for $5 US. Thank you again for your support. Eric, if it's not too forward of me, do you think RTTL will engage in private arbitration? Has RTTL discussed on how to handle internal squabbles?
Yeah, we have, and things have come up, and we've established, our current best practices to address those situations. We have arbitration clauses in our operating agreement at the LLC level. And at the PMA level, we've kind of implemented a general policy where if you have a problem with another member, you bring that problem up with them before you address it with anyone else. And I don't think you can successfully curtail gossip because that's just how people are. But we noticed very quickly there was a problem with gossip. People will find reasons to object to each other no matter what. There's no way to avoid it. So if people find things objectionable, go to your brother first with those issues before taking it up with a magistrate or whatnot. I forget the exact, what I'm paraphrasing.
Yeah, Matthew 18.
Matthew 18.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go. Yeah, Matthew 18.
Good memory.
But okay.
Yeah, so that's the first step. And then once, that person has been notified of how that person feels, then you move on to, if the behavior continues, notifying the board. The board approaches the person, assesses the situation, sees if any, request for addressing the grievance is even called for. And then if they do request some behavior be changed, then, you give it some time and see if the behavior does in fact change. If it doesn't, then the next step is now the original person with the complaint is free to bring it up at a public meeting, not, in back channels, behind closed doors, person to person, because that's still gossip. And the problem there is it's a game of telephone and no one can discern the truth of the situation. So we've decided first you go to the person, then you go to the board. And then if all else fails, when we have a public meeting, which we have occasionally, then you're free to bring it up, speak your piece and we'll have it out. And whoever has contextualizing information will be present and everything can come to light. So since we implemented that, we haven't really had major problems, but I'm sure there will continue to be new problems and we'll develop new arbitration and conflict mitigation strategies going forward.
Yeah, there's usually dispute resolution clauses, and these are encouraged because our courts are overwhelmed. And so private arbitration is encouraged. And whenever you talk about ownership, they can always go to the courts if there's a dispute over ownership. I would recommend that ultimately, if all parties are not satisfied, that you always reserve the option to pay them back their principal, not the interest but the principal, and let them be on their way. But is what I would suggest. Ultimately, if you have to,
right. And we have, exit strategies for problematic members as well. We have ways where we can kick members out and fairly compensate them for their investment.
So I think now it's probably apropos to get to the elephant in the room. Your community has been in the news a lot lately due to some negative reporting. What exactly has happened? I haven't followed it closely. What exactly has happened to generate this attention? And then how have you responded to that?
Yeah, I mean, it was all kind of whipped up by one Reddit user. I think the first thread was on r/Jewish, and he, didn't fairly represent us, but basically characterized what we're doing. He got a lot of facts wrong. He said that we were selling real estate and various other things, which we were, obviously not doing. He got biographical details wrong, but those were, minor. The basic idea of what we're doing is inherently offensive to a lot of people. And so enough people wanted to attack us, not because we violated some particular article in the Fair Housing Act, but because, we're whites wanting to mind our own business and do our own things and continue existing. I think that's ultimately where the objection has its root. It's like a suicide pact. The whites who have decided that this is just happening and we're all going into one big mixed society, they don't like the idea that there will continue to be actual white communities that they're not a part of. I think it's like more comfortable thinking the whole world is changing or ending than like I myself am being deprived of a certain kind of life. Anyway, that's like a psychological aside. So I think that's the deep motive. And just anti-white animus in the system in general from propaganda over decades. But his campaign was relatively successful. He created 20 different threads on different subreddits. So he made a lot of noise, this one guy, and told people to contact government offices, media groups, advocacy groups, civil rights groups. And, there were some statements from some of those types of groups. The ADL made a statement against us. Big surprise. And, it hasn't been that consequential from a legal perspective. We haven't been contacted by any authority in the state of Arkansas. The Fair Housing Commission could conceivably decide to fine us if they think we're in violation, but I don't think we're in violation, and our legal counsel doesn't believe we're in violation. And we're constantly looking to improve our position so that we are firmly compliant with all existing federal and state laws. So nothing really has come of it except a bunch of news stories, some statements. There's some like Missouri Democrats who spoke out against us. The Arkansas Attorney General did say a very vague statement where someone approached him and he's like, discrimination has no place in a open society. I'll look into the matter. And so he, in a way, he condemned us, but at that point in time, he hadn't even looked at what we were doing at all. And we haven't heard from him. So I really don't know if anything's going to come of it.
Yeah.
I think it's a bad move if they do it, like actually sue us, because it's just going to galvanize more support and accelerate all this.
I would recommend, look, every other group's allowed to do this. The ADL is a wholly owned subsidiary by B'nai B'rith, which you have to be Jewish to be a member of B'nai B'rith, which is I think it's a 501c8. It might just be a 501c3 now, but the Sons of Israel is still a 501c8. But I would recommend talking about what these other people are doing, because the Jewish community of Kiryas Joel, New York, what they're
Sure.
doing is much more controversial because they're running a parallel society to civil government. And so I would talk about what these other groups are doing. It's because you're a white identitarian.
Yeah, I bring it up.
Yeah. And then they'll shut up about it because the ADL, they have no leg to stand on. I mean, they're owned by an ethnic fraternity.
I didn't know that. Yeah, I wish I knew that at the time.
Yeah,
actually.
Yeah, and it's a 501c3, so it can receive tax-deductible funds from the public, even though it's owned by an all-Jewish group, right? The B'nai B'rith. So I would bring up, the Jews have very innovative structures for maintaining exclusivity for themselves while receiving support from the public. And whenever you deal with the public, that's where this anti-discrimination laws start kicking in. So like if you were running a store and you only sold to whites or you only hired white employees, that's a different commerce is there's lots of laws about non-discrimination when it comes to commerce. But when it comes to owning things together, there's all sorts of private membership groups. I mean, you have to be Irish to be part of the Ancient Order of Hibernia, right? And the Ancient Order of Hibernia is allowed to own lodges and property together, right? So when it comes to owning things together, we're not talking about buying and selling with strangers. And it's much more controversial that a 501c3, which is the same legal structure as a church, is pretending to do nonprofit journalism, the ADL in this case, and that it's completely owned by an ethnic fraternity, and so, it's hypocrisy. And what these other groups are doing, there's plenty of groups in the United States that they're all ethnically related and they own things collectively, and that is perfectly legal. And this is not a threat, to their, to commerce and I would bring up these other groups because that's a great way to shut up the media. As soon as you start talking about what non-whites are doing, they shut up. And anyway,
I totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
for sure. The Muslim community in Texas. There was a Black intentional community a few months ago in the news in Georgia. It seems like, unfortunately, they embezzled the $25 million that were donated and didn't actually do anything. But, no one had a problem with it at the time. So, yeah, Curious Stroll. There's, communities in Pennsylvania of Orthodox Jews, many of them, just like the Amish, in a lot of the same areas. So they do it all the time. It's a clear double standard, and yeah, it should be called out for sure.
Yeah, and the Amish own their property outright with the state of Pennsylvania or Ohio, Indiana, where they live. The Hutterites are communal though; they're 501Ds. Yeah, 501Ds, like an art commune, and they have to they put all the money in a common a wheel, a common accounts, and then they divide it equally between the adult members of their group to pay taxes.
I didn't realize they were that. Yeah, I didn't know they were that communal with it.
Yeah,
They're
they're Christian communists. Christians are one of the few successful communist communities in North America. And Todd, yeah, my Anabaptist friend over here,
Yeah. So here's something too, Aarvoll. To what extent, if any, was this project influenced by Orania, the intentional community of Afrikaners?
Yeah, to a considerable extent. We actually visited Orania this January, myself and our vice president. We've implemented some of their policies, like the own work policy. We're not hard line about it here, but when it's possible for community members to do our own work, that's what we do. In Orania, it's actually a little bit looser than that. We thought that it would be good for economic reasons, and that if we're paying our own labor, well, we're essentially subsidizing the development of our own common asset, the land that the corporation owns. But in Orania, it's just Afrikaner labor. I think that policy would be harder to implement here. You could probably still do it based on the scale that we're operating at, and the fact that these are different, private contractors that you're hiring on a case-by-case basis. So as far as I know, like, you're legal as an individual to discriminate on, the ethnicity of the contractors you hire, technically speaking.
Yeah, you are.
Right, of course. So, I mean, we could do something like that, and we've opened it up, when there's a labor shortage, when we have too much work, people have considered. So far, there hasn't been like an outside construction crew working here. We've always been able to handle our own work. But that's one policy. The way they handle their development company, we weren't able to take that into consideration with Community One, and we probably didn't have the budget up front to organize in this way. But now we think that really, instead of selling lots, or not lots, shares that are associated with lots that have like nothing developed whatsoever, no water, power, or septic, it's probably a better practice to do some initial development with a single development company, because the way water lines go, the way wells are shared, the way septic systems sometimes can be shared if they're large systems, or you could even do a packaging or package plant and, your own private sewer system essentially, or you could be tapped into rural sewer. It does exist in some places if you get lucky with a property. So probably a development company should organize making sure that every lot has good access to power, water, and septic. That's what they do in Orania with new lots. And then they sell those, well, they sell shares in their corporation as well. They don't sell lots, but they sell those shares with that basic stuff in place. And then people build their own houses. That's in some ways like easier to accomplish and lower risk. Like, yeah, your building could collapse on you, but if you screw up your septic system, then the whole community, pays the consequences of that. So that is important. And so that's another idea. The way their bank operates, we want to do something similar. We've looked into 501c8 organization because it allows not just for insurance funds, but also for credit unions. And so we've thought about, how to integrate a credit union. You don't need as much capital as you might think. It's going to be difficult and complex, but there's another group that used that structure that now we're likely going to work with. None of that's final, but I'm just, and maybe I'm talking too much inside shop about what we're doing, and I'm
No,
being
no,
unwise.
this
But
is the interesting stuff. Yeah, yeah. The credit unions. There's a lot of this. This is the nonprofit world of these 501s, and only the 501c3s. Those are the very public. They're like publicly traded companies. But for nonprofits, there's a lot of laws whenever you're talking about taking money from the public, from strangers. But the member funded, most of these 501s are like member funded, and members have a lot more privacy. Member funded organizations have a lot more privacy, and that there's no tax reporting requirements because you're not asking for tax deductibility for donations. You're asking for the IRS to leave your common funds alone because you're pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and you're mutually supporting each other through insurance like benefits or financial like benefits. And so because you're not dealing with the public, there's less reporting requirements to the public, so you have more privacy. And that's and most of those 501s are member funded organizations, whether it's I don't know, a sports league, or there's some of them just take care of graveyards. Some of them, labor unions are one of these 501s, and business leagues, and that whole world of nonprofits, runs parallel to the profit world. And the profit entities, the for-profit entities, are like LLCs and S corporations and C corps, and those are the good entities because they limit liability, and you want to stay away from limited partnerships, and that's why everything needs to be in contracts. It needs to be written down, and you need to have your relationship worked out.
So what would, if we could speak of such a thing, what would the average day at RTTL look like for the people that live there?
Well, it depends on the person. We do, as far as like communal activities, we have dinner together once a week. Actually, I booked this with you during our, I'm looking out the window and they're all sitting there having community dinner and I'm not participating, but that's all right. I'll maybe catch the very tail end of it. As far as like individual stuff, depends on what your occupation is. Some people have work online. Some people have made a living for extended periods of time just doing construction here. For a long time, I had a job nearby. Just the demands of the recent exposure, and I've literally all day yesterday, the day before, all day today, I could not respond to all the messages from either media requests or people who wanted to join, and I think I told you, our interviews are booked out for a month. It's just we need someone working full time to even manage the current situation. So I got a lot of support and was able to quit that job. But until then, I worked Monday to Friday, 50, 55 hours, sort of a typical life. And then, there's a lot more homesteading type activity than your typical neighborhood. I have goats. I used to have chickens, not here, but where I lived in southern Missouri. I'd like to get chickens again. Other people have chickens. Some other people have goats as well. I'd like to integrate other livestock. So, we want this community to be agrarian, simple, rural. It's good optics. This is the community that now, people more or less know what it looks like. Some people know where it is. And so we want to keep this first community as clean and good looking as possible. And I think the rural Americana stuff, it plays well. And also it's my sensibilities. I like the kind of rural agrarian vibe that we have here. So it's a lot of building as well. I put up a couple structures here myself and have worked on structures that other people have put up. There's always something going up, something's being framed or finished. And there's not enough labor to handle everything. That's going to change very quickly though, because so many people are reaching out and want to get involved. So that's some of the day to day. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that really stands out. I like walking on our own private roads. That's pretty neat. Where you don't have to like I can record a video, for example, walking down the road and not feel self-conscious at all because everyone else understands the kind of stuff that I would be inclined to say and supports it. And yeah, it's just, you feel at ease because you can speak your mind and you're not worried about offending people. And not that we try to say offensive things all the time. But yeah, it's a different kind of conversation around the dinner table.
But you're not walking on eggshells, though, right? That's the key thing.
No, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's really important to be able to say what you want to say, right? So I guess the next thing would be, where do you see, and we've already touched on this a little bit, right? But where do you see this project going in the future? I mean, so we have the bad press, you're dealing with that, but it seems to have brought people's attention to you. So,
right.
The next, 5 years, let's say, what do you think it looks like for RTTL?
If things keep going how they're going, I also don't consider it bad press by and large. Like, the worst hit piece was actually Sky News, it seems to me. And, I looked at this journalist's stuff up front, and he seemed fairly balanced on other pieces he's done. So I had optimism that he'd be balanced with us. He wasn't. He obviously tried to skew it in one direction. But even then, if you look at the YouTube comments for his original upload, through Sky News's channel, like, they're all positive, hardly any pushback. There are people of all races, ethnicities that support what we're doing. I get messages from Asians, Hispanics, Blacks, a lot of messages saying, like, we think it's great what you're doing, so yeah, I don't even see the negative media as a big downside. It's just constantly recruiting new support, financially, as well as new members, and just more people wanting to follow suit. So we'll probably have 3 new communities in the next few months: Pacific Northwest, Ozarks, and Appalachia. And I will try to get out there and physically help to organize them. Just getting the ball rolling is the difficult thing. You can have a group chat sitting around for years talking about stuff and nothing ever happens. And it is theory to praxis. That's the hard jump. And so to jumpstart that, I'm just planning on traveling to these different places and facilitating the initial foundation, making sure there is a board of managers there on site who are responsible people, who can do all the appropriate filings. And in some cases, the management of Return to the Land will be kind of used to help manage some things that, you may or may not have someone who's good with accounting on site. You may or may not have people who have started businesses before and understand, how to start an LLC, et cetera. So that, yeah, there's going to be recreational properties. I talked about that before, and I'd like to see a large network of those. That's something that can be started in basically any state. I want to start one in California. I'm going out to California at the end of one of these months. My schedule is just insane, so I can't even keep track. August, the end of August, I should be out there, and then I'll be in Alabama in the middle of August, and they got stuff everywhere. But anyway, so yeah, like, I'm going to keep pushing hard and get a large network going as soon as possible. And then we'll start a tier of membership that is paid. It won't be obligatory. Right now, it's a $25 application fee. If you want to apply, that's lifelong membership. You're in with that. But we want to start a tier of membership with benefits such as access to the recreational properties, camping rights at communities, things like that, so that we can fund our legal efforts in the future. We got a lot of support, more than $50,000 donated to us for our legal budget. So we're hiring, lawyers in real estate, civil rights act, civil rights law, securities law, stuff like that. And it's been very helpful. And we found that what we're doing is so kind of niche that a lot of these lawyers don't even know what to think. Like, when we bring the whole thing, it's like it involves so many different aspects of law and it's so complex. They're going to take time even kind of wrapping their minds around it. So I think because of that, like, challenging what we're doing will be a nightmare for, like, if some team of lawyers is charged by the ADL to come attack us, it's going to take them time to even unravel, how the whole thing works, which I guess is good, you know.
Yeah, I've spoken to attorneys about this, and there's a lot of possibilities. Like there's these environmental trusts that and because being environmental is very cool, and so they've created these new entities. And one of these attorneys suggested to me, it's like, well, why don't you make the community an environmental trust? I'm like, okay,
Hmm.
and we talked about that. So that would be a way to, status signal that you've got the good pro-environmental values, while pursuing, your other values. So, I
We
do
have
have a question. Like, is it the private membership association? Is that a separate entity? What is that entity, if you don't mind me asking?
That's a PMA. So there's no filing other than like we have kept records. Maybe there was like some initial process. I wasn't the one to file it. Peter was, if there was some filing with the state. But PMAs exist for all sorts of purposes. They're very general, and it basically just puts what you're doing in the private domain as opposed to the public domain. It's easier to start than a 501c8. The other problem with like a fraternal benefit society is that they're ethnic associations, not racial associations. So technically, a PMA is a little bit more appropriate for what we're trying to do. However, we do want to wrap in multiple types of legal structure. And an easy way to get around that is to simply list every single European ethnicity and say it's a benefit society for this list of ethnicities rather than like white Americans or something. So I've lost my track a little bit here.
Yeah, I just asked you
It's been a long day.
what structure the PMA was.
Yeah. It's just a private association. So we have our articles that outlines, what it takes to be a member, what's expected
Articles
of
of
members,
association.
what membership.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Articles of association. Okay.
Yes.
Right. All right.
So we have a couple super chats again. Death Culture, another $10 USA. Thank you. Aarvoll, do you think RTTL will invest in architecture in its communities? What would you prefer as aesthetics go, like Annabelle South architecture or Victorian Northeast, for instance?
My preference is neoclassical, unsurprisingly. That's pretty expensive, typically. I like a variety of traditional European architectural methods. Is it like Tudor architecture with the top floor is outset a little bit, and there's typically those cross beams?
Oh yeah, that's what is that called?
I like that. That's my
yes.
aesthetic. It's more affordable.
And we have another one from Love Gun for $4.99 US. Thank you for your support. You do this out of love for your people, not hate for others. And in the words of my father, it's not them, it's the libs.
So, very true. Yes.
So there's that. So yeah, I think unless you have any more questions, Rufus, I think we've sort of gone through all the relevant questions people might have.
No, I think we covered, and I want to thank you for your candor on a lot of the legal stuff. Those were my questions. And when someone donates, you're talking about legal defense. Is it the PMA doing the legal defense, or do you have a separate subsidiary organization or something that's doing it? Do you have a 501c3 for any of that?
Not yet. No, it is the PMA that's doing that.
Yeah. Well, you can have 501c3 subsidiaries. You might want to look into. I'm sure you are. I'm sure you guys are looking into that.
I left out. We formed a company for the management of the PMA, so it's not just the articles. There's also an LLC with its own board of managers to be responsible for managing the PMA.
Okay.
Well, I want to thank you, Aarvoll, for coming on and for talking to my audience about your project. Before we wrap up, is there anything you want to leave us with to sort of just like summarize what you're doing or where you're going?
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear from what we've talked about. People probably have the general idea. You can go to our website, returntoland.org, and see an example. They're a little outdated. We don't keep the absolute most up-to-date legal documents out there for obvious reasons, but you can see a version of our articles of association, a version of our LLC operating agreement, and individual operating agreements may vary based on the community. So that's up to the community members, what exactly they decide on. And the goal is to, if you want to form a community in your area, we will help find people, organize the whole process, because that's kind of the skill set that we've been building. And I think it's something that it's not trivial. A lot of people think about buying land and homesteading and building things and kind of romanticize it. And then very few people actually do it. So this is a way to make that whole process easier and to do it as a community, because who wants to really homestead and just be out by yourself with no social support around you? We get to choose our neighbors. We get to develop land. And we're not consigned to rural areas permanently. It's just the safest place to do it. Arkansas is a very red state. We're in a very red area of a very red state. Whoever heard our case would likely already be fully familiar with many of our ideas. So it wouldn't be foreign to them. If we tried to do this in New Jersey, it would be a different story. So we're doing it where it's possible and easy up front. And then the goal is to kind of ratchet up into more difficult areas. So places like California, New York, will do that at a recreational club level first, and then ratchet up to ultimately full-time residential communities even there. And like I said, I am in favor of the big tent. Let's all have one association so we have a lot of resources to defend ourselves, because that's what our opposition does. They have big organizations with many thousands of members paying in and supporters. And, we want that freedom. So, which is why individual LLCs or whatever corporate structure or trust people decide to go with, they have all the latitude in the world. It's very minimal, what the PMA stipulates. Those are our values. They're values that are truly pan-European, shared basically across the board with very few exceptions. So, if you can work with us, work with us. If not, that's fine. We also support other people doing it independently. But I think there's a lot of promise in an interconnected network that shares resources, and it's growing. So that's good.
So we have another super chat, Obadiah Vandal for $5. Thank you for your support. This is all very encouraging in our bleak little world. Godspeed, Aarvoll. Great stream, Todd. Well, thank you. Now, before we wrap out, Aavroll, where can people contact you or find more information about you or what you do? So go ahead and show for that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, if you want to join the PMA, go to returntotheland.org. There's the process that we've implemented. I get messages from people who just want to join, and I'm like, well, great. Here's the website. So if you have some other kind of inquiry, you want to do an interview for your channel, or I try to talk to everyone, as much as possible. I was just on a space before we started with some, they weren't exactly guys on our side. They also weren't exactly the highest IQ crowd, to be honest. So it was a little bit tedious by the end. So I was glad that I had, this conversation scheduled to kind of, detox from that previous interaction. But I will talk to anyone. So if you want to schedule something, you can message me on Telegram at Aarvoll, Aarvoll, or on X, if you have X Premium, I guess, or I follow you, you can DM me. It's at Aarvoll, Aarvoll _ there. Aarvoll was taken.
All right. Well, thank you, Aarvoll, and thank you, Musonius Rufus. It was a very interesting and informative discussion. This is Todd Lewis of the Praise of Fly podcast, signing off.